Thank you very much. I appreciate you getting up and being here today. I wanted to talk with you about the power of friendship, and in the process, I am going to tell you a couple of stories, and I'm going to share a lot of data with you because I am both a storyteller and a nerd. I love numbers because they help us to actually give substance to our stories, and especially in a world where numbers and science doesn't seem to matter that much anymore, I thought it might be good to actually take a look at some of them. So you may want to ask, why does Bettina want to talk about friendship? And more importantly, what makes her the right person to do so? Because obviously in my bio you didn't see that I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist, I'm not a physician, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I am just a serial entrepreneur. And I thought, well, I'll go back to the beginning because I've always had very strong opinions and I was always able to put my whole body into those. I have also always known what the right direction was, and I never shied away from telling people where to go. And I clearly never had an issue with telling people what to do and how to do it. So you're going to get a dose of that today as well. How did I end up here and telling you about friendship? I'm a transplant from Germany. I was born and raised there by some very typical, somewhat strict and conservative German parents. And when I announced to them after I finished high school that I wanted to become an artiste and work at the theater, they said, that's really great, but not with our pocketbook. And so I had to find a job that was going to also secure a living for me, and found the approval of my parents. Luckily, I always had a plan B because I strongly believe that we should only do something in life that we actually are passionate about, because otherwise it just burns us out and wears us out. And my second love always have been books. I'm an avid reader, and if you would lock me in a library and make sure I had a comfortable place to sleep, I'd probably be very happy for a very long time. So I got a degree in publishing, worked in that industry for some time, and then realized that technology was going to have a severe impact on that industry. And just to give you a framework, and you saw those pictures where it said 1959. So I am 68 years now. I was born in 1957. So in the early 80s, it was the emergence of technology, of new ways of distributing content to televisions and screens and all those kinds of things. So I decided to go to university at that point in time, get a double master's in law and literature, and specialize in entertainment and copyright law. Not that I ever wanted to practice as an attorney, that was not my goal, but I wanted to understand the tools and the frameworks that lived behind that. That's the geeky part. I got lucky because one of my professors was also an editor at one of the largest publishing companies in Germany. And I did a presentation in his class, and he said, our publishing company needs somebody like you. Would you like to meet with our CEO? And I said, yeah, of course, I need to make money to pay for my studies here. And so he got me that meeting, and they were like, oh, we think this is absolutely perfect. You can work in our rights department. I'm like, that's too boring. I'm not interested. That's not why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I got lucky again because that CEO was open-minded enough to say, obviously you're seeing something we're not seeing. Why don't you crawl around in our publishing company for 2 weeks and find something that you think might be interesting that also helps us figuring out how we march into the future. And so 2 weeks later, I came to him and I said, I know exactly what I want to do. Here I'm going back to my creative roots. I want to create a media department that is the first of its kind in Europe, because in European countries, when an author signs a contract with a publishing company, the publishing company gets motion picture rights, television rights, all those things. But they don't actively do anything with it because they want to protect their books. And I said, I want to do that, and I want to sell these rights to television companies and motion picture companies around the world. And they said, well, in the last 10 years, we've made like 100,000 Deutschmarks with that, so good luck, it's not going to do anything, but as long as you help our rights department, you can have those 2 rooms in the basement, a couple of computers, those were the first computers in the publishing company ever, and you can hire an assistant and you can do whatever it is that you want to do. It turned into a profit center of substantial amounts within 18 months. I became one of the most controversial people in German publishing because I was called so American, and I had never been to this country, because I was treating intellectual property like it was sausage and cheese. That was a quote from one of the newspapers. And then I bumped into what I call a concrete ceiling and not a glass ceiling, because it had become successfully enough that they decided that they now needed to have a VP. And I said, hey, I built this thing, and they patted me on the head and said, no, we're going to hire this doctor to, be the guy. And now that I've lived in Texas long enough, I probably used the equivalent of bless your heart at that point in time. And I started my first company in 1988, and I basically then represented film companies to help them package their deals. 3 months after I did that, I was approached by ICM, which is one of the large talent agencies in Hollywood. And they said, we need a partner in Europe. Would you be interested? And I said, of course. So that's how I ended up in this country. Because one day I had my small little office in a sublet room in Munich, and the next day I also had an office on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. And that's where ultimately I met my husband, who's somewhere at the back of the room, who convinced me to stay and to then move with him to Texas, because he was working on a project where he needed to be more centrally in the US. And so I decided that I had actually spent enough time sleeping just on airplanes and commuting on an almost bi-weekly basis between Germany and Los Angeles. And I ended up here, and in literally within 6 months, we moved to Oak Cliff. So that's how I came from Germany via Hollywood to Oak Cliff. And so I'm almost an OG here, too, because we've lived here now for 31 years. And if I didn't live in this neighborhood, I don't think I would still live here. So as I said, Stephen and I have now been married for over 30 plus years. I'm saying the cat lady, but we're really the cat couple on the block, because we have 5 rescues inside the house, and we take care of a feral colony, so we can capture them, get them, spayed and neutered and all that good stuff. And I turned into a serial entrepreneur because I couldn't continue what I had done in Hollywood, so I started a couple of companies, sold some successful, some were not so successful. The last company I ran for 15 years sadly became a victim of the pandemic, because our clients became victims of the pandemic. And so now I'm about to start a new venture that I'll tell you a little bit about. And now you're going to ask, well, how does that connect to, now this doesn't want to advance, here we go. So what does that have to do with friendship, and why is Bettina so obsessed with friendship? Well, I'm going to tell you another story. When you come from another country, and some of you may have had that same experience, you basically leave everything behind, including your connections. I didn't go to school here, I didn't go to college, I didn't go to university. I came here, when people say with nothing, it's not that much financial as it is actually having that network of people, that community that can cheer you on, that can support you, that is there if you need somebody to bounce off ideas, that can, hold you in a moment that is hard and cheer you on when you have your wins. You have to create all of that from scratch. And I had to do that a few times. I had to do that when I ended up first in Los Angeles, and then I had to do it again when we came here to Dallas. And I always counted myself as lucky, because I felt that it was relatively easy for me to make friends. Until about a year ago, I got a text message from a friend that I had reached out to and said, you know, we're way overdue for a cup of coffee. And they said, you know what? I don't really think I'm getting enough out of our coffee get-togethers anymore. I'm in a different season of my life. We have a baby now. We want to hang out with other people that also have babies. And it's just not giving me enough back. And of course, for a moment, that kind of was jarring. But I always also knew, because a lot of my friends are and were a lot younger, which had to do with the work I've been doing, because most of the people I'm surrounded with are at least 20, 30, in some cases 40 years younger, that they might not want to hang out with somebody who is their mother's age. And I thought, well, no big deal. And then I realized that the friends that I had had that were my own age had pretty much all moved away. They had retired in other states. They had found new partners and moved to other areas of the country, or they had left the country altogether and started their lives over in Europe. So what I realized was that I was missing having women my own age in my life, because I also needed somebody, and I understood where that friend in some way was coming from, that understand the place and the season in life that I'm in. Somebody I can sit with and not even talk with because they understand, somebody who's had the same experience and maybe lived the same stories. And then I thought, okay, no big deal. We live in a world of apps. I mean, there are apps for everything, to try on eyeshadow, to figure out what clothes to wear, how to cook a perfect cup of coffee, I don't know. And I thought, no big deal. I'm going to sign up for a couple of apps, and I'm going to be proactive, and I'm going to find me some new friends. And that's when it became really interesting, because friendship in this country seems to be treated more like an afterthought. So the first thing I discovered, that most friendship apps actually run on dating app algorithms. And I believe that the criteria that we use to choose a friend are very, very different from the criteria that we use to find somebody to date. The second thing, of course, that may not be bad for you, but was bad for me, was that all of them, with very few exceptions, were skewed very young. They were for people in their 20s, maybe 30s, and the main gist of it was really, let's go out, let's party, let's get drunk and have a good time, which isn't my lifestyle anymore. So, and none of the places felt like something where I could be myself, and I think that that is another problem that we have in the world that we live in now, because we're constantly presenting an image of ourselves in the outside world that actually is not really close to the way we live our life. And at this stage in my life, I'm just not interested in pretending anything anymore. Not that I ever have, but really, I'm not interested in it anymore. And the only thing that came close to what I wanted was an app that curates get-togethers for women. So that was one of my main criteria. I wanted to just find women friends. I wasn't interested in a dating app. I'm married. And it cost about $350 to participate in 6 events where it covered kind of like your drinks, and some stranger was putting you together with 10 other strangers that you had never met before to do pottery or something else that I may or may not be interested in. And I thought neither the price tag nor the concept was appealing to me. So then I thought, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the only one who has this issue finding friends. And I decided to talk to strangers, like everywhere. In my favorite shops in Bishop Arts, at the coffee shop, if there was a woman sitting at a table, I'd walk up to her and say, I know this is a weird question, but how do you make friends? And I do a 5K walk 3 or 4 times a week, and I'd see other women that would walk, or I'd meet the same people that were like outside their house, and if they fit somewhere in my demographic, I would say, hey, you got friends? How do you find them? And while they were a little startled in the beginning, I started having some really interesting conversations. And what I found out was that that idea of loneliness that can exist even when you are in a loving relationship permeated all of theirs as well. And they didn't know how to go about, in the world that we live in now that is not community-driven but individualistic, how to go about finding new friends. So that's when Kaffeeklatsch was born. And I decided if it's not there, I'm going to build it. So Kaffeeklatsch is going to be an app for women over 50 to find friends in a safe and non-performative environment. And for those of you who want to know a whole lot more about that, I can talk with you afterwards. Because why do I want to talk about friendship? Because right now I'm just telling you my story. The interesting thing that I stumbled across when I was doing all my research and looking into all these apps was that I found that there is actually an issue with loneliness in our society as general. And some of you may have heard and seen some of that because a lot of people talked about it during the pandemic. The thing is, it didn't go away with the pandemic. It stayed. And what I also found out is that it has quite some serious health implications. So here are some of the numbers I promised you the nerdy stuff was going to come to. 52% of all Americans report feeling lonely. So look around this room, that is half of the people that are sitting in this room. 47% say that their relationships are not meaningful. That's almost half of the people in this room. And 57% of people say they eat all their meals alone. That's almost 6 out of 10. And if that doesn't make you think, here is another thing. Just for the young'uns in this room that may think, well, it only applies to the older generation. Actually, the loneliest generation is Generation Z, with 79% reporting feelings of loneliness. And the second loneliest generation are millennials, with 71% saying they feel lonely at times. So if there are 20 people in this room, 6 of them are not lonely and the rest is. And my conclusion after that was, this isn't just about women over 50 or people in old age. It actually is something that affects all of us. That's when I talked with Grant and Doug, and I said, I really think I want to talk about that because I think it is something we all need to start thinking about. And as I said earlier, there are severe health risks associated with that. So we may just think, well, so okay, so I'm lonely. But what you may not know is that being lonely actually is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, or being an alcoholic, or suffering from obesity. And when I learned that, I realized that here I am, I'm living a healthy life, or so I think. I'm eating healthy, I am exercising, I am putting decent food in my body, I don't do anything in excess. But it may be all for nothing if I don't solve that problem. And when it turns chronic, which happens very easy in the world that we live in now, it leads to weakened immune systems and increased inflammation. In other words, the reason you get colds more frequently, you get sick, you can't really shake certain things from your body, are directly related to that. It makes depression, anxiety, and substance abuse worse and supports it. And in older adults, it also is linked to cognitive decline and dementia. So if it doesn't affect you, think about your parents, your grandparents, and how loneliness actually has a direct impact on how they're going to age. And now you're going to say, well, what about all those fabulous virtual connections and friends that I have? I am chatting with everybody, I'm texting, I'm talking, I'm posting, I'm doing all that stuff. Well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but actually, there is a 9-year study by Baylor University, and it came to the conclusion that the more time we spend interacting online, the actually lonelier we may feel. Now, I expected to read that when it came to passive consumption, the scrolling and the browsing and the looking at people's stories and profiles that have nothing to do with reality but make us feel like we're all losers. But what was really interesting is that active users, people that are actually involved in posting and engaging with others, also had increased feelings of loneliness. So here is how that stacks up. Real life friends actually boost our well-being by 50%. Whereas online networks have zero correlation with happiness. When we have face-to-face conversations, our brains are fully activated, whereas during video calls, our brains are significantly suppressed. And physical presence of others releases oxytocin, which is our bonding hormone in our body, whereas text-based communication leads to zero oxytocin. So if you think all that stuff that you're doing on your phones has any positive impact on your bodies, think again. Now, of course, I wasn't going to let you hanging with just all that stuff. I have to give you some good news. The good news actually is that Harvard did an 80-year study on trying to figure out what makes people live a long and happy life. And the conclusion they came to after 80 years and thousands of people that were part in that study is that the solution is good relationships. Having strong friendships actually can cut depression by 30%, which is something medication has a very hard time to do. It speeds recovery from illness. The friend that comes by, with that bowl of chicken soup actually does more than just bring you nourishment. They actually help you speed up recovery. It boosts your immune function. It reduces the risk of death by 22%, which is the same thing as if you were stopping to smoke if you were a chain smoker. And it lowers the risk for dementia by 26%. So think about that too when you think about the people that are part of your family or your extended neighborhood. And of course, I forgot to turn off that alarm. So my friendship obsession then basically led me here. What if our neighborhood became also a neighborhood of friendship? I don't know if many of you were there last year when Sarah Steinman stood right here where I'm standing right now and talked about the Good Neighbor Guide. At that time, I had already started to dig into what I wanted to do with Kaffeeklatsch, and it left a deep impression on me because she talked about how important it is for everybody to be a good neighbor. And without going into details, I think that in the days and times that we live in, that is ever more important. And I thought, well, she gave us some instructions and some ideas on how to be a good neighbor. What if we took that a step further? What if we decided that we're not just going to be good neighbors, but we're going to be good friends? And in the process, lay a groundwork for something that can really alter our neighborhood. So how would we get there? Because of course we need instructions. I need to. And what I found is that there is one more piece of research. And that piece of research for me shifted everything, because it actually said that the biggest health benefits don't just come from having friends, but actually come from being a great friend to somebody else. And what that shifted for me was that having friends is not something passive anymore. It actually means that we have to take the initiative. We have to be the ones who are actually taking action. And so I thought, what would that look like? And I wanted to leave you with some small, practical ways that we could start building friendships in this neighborhood. Not some grand gestures, because the interesting thing is that friendships don't need grand gestures and major events. They grow with the small stuff, the little things that we do consistently. So I wanted to give you some real doable ways to be there for each other. Check in. Send one text this week to say to somebody thinking of you. Invite a neighbor for a walk, coffee, or porch sit. Even 20 minutes count. Be reliable. That's, of course, a German piece, too. But show up when you say you will, because trust grows in those small moments. The being there when you say you are. Give first. Offer help before you're asked. The interesting thing is that you're not just doing something great for somebody else at that moment, but science actually shows that it strengthens your health as well. And then make it a routine. Make it a recurring ritual, a weekly walk, a monthly dinner, a porch morning, a reach out, a phone call, because that may be better than a text. And I think that if everyone in this room today was just doing one of those things, today, tomorrow, next week, we could literally change this entire community and this entire neighborhood. I don't know if any of you are familiar, and I can't remember his name right now, but there was a couple of years ago an action called 1 Billion Happy. The guy who started it, his first name is Mo. He was one of the top executives at Google. And he was in charge also of some of the AI initiatives, the very early on ones. And he got absolutely frightened when he watched how AI was looking at the world that we live in. And he said that unless we want to create our own extinction, we need to find ways to create on AI on the good things that say something why humanity should exist. Because what AI was learning was hate, anger, racism, all those kinds of things. And he said, what's the value of the human race at some point if that is all it is? And he wanted to create a counterpoint. So I almost want to say it was like a pyramid scheme where he said, okay, we start with one person and you post something that makes you happy or how you shared happiness, and you share that with 3 people, and those 3 people share it with another 3 people, and we can get to 1 billion people that are sharing things online to create a counterpoint to what is going on. So in some ways, I want to start creating 1 billion friendships right here, right now, and in this room. Thank you.
That was awesome. We have a few minutes for some questions, so if anyone has any quick questions, we'll take a couple. So Bettina's usually the one who asks.
I just wanted to say, where am I sitting in the first row?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll return the favor, Bettina. I heard you telling Doug before what Kaffeeklatsch means, and I would love to hear the whole story.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. I tried out a whole lot of other names because it seems like apps always have these super short names these days, and most of the time they don't mean anything. And I couldn't find anything. And then, of course, I was like, okay, and I need to have a matching domain, and I need to do this and that. But it ultimately came down to what's the meaning of it. And since I'm German, Kaffeeklatsch is actually a gathering mostly of women to sit around with coffee and some pastries and to gossip just a little bit and to talk, and I always called it therapy with coffee and kuchen, or coffee and cake, because it's a safe environment where you can share and not have to pretend to be anything but who you are. And almost all cultures have something different. And so I decided to call this app Kaffeeklatsch. And I have a little PSA, please, for those of you who have moms, grandmas, aunts, friends in their wider community. I am looking for women who would love to help shape the app. We're going to do little, what we call cup and conversation gatherings for 5, 6, 7 women to sit in a room or to participate virtually, because we don't want to build it in a vacuum. I don't assume that I know how all women want to connect with others, what makes all women feel safe at that age, and what they value in friendship, and how we can make sure that that's what they can find. Because the whole goal of our app is actually to start virtual and take you off there as quickly as possible so you can actually build real life relationships.
Let's give one more round to Bettina. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have a couple more